As I laid in the workman's hut watching the television, Ted was at work fiddling with the radio. He soon managed to get it working and it buzzed to life. The static was replaced by a voice. Just as this happened, the show I had been watching was replaced by an emergency broadcast from the vet. The message informed us that a disease that had originated in a lab in America had grown worse. Based on calculations, the entirety of the country had been infected. Due to this, all trade and communication had been discontinued.
What's going on, Bob?
Something about a disease in America. If anyone was feeling any symptoms like headaches, vomiting, loss of consciousness, and bloodshot eyes, then you were to report to the nearest hospital. You knew this was serious when they stated the punishment for not receiving medical assistance would be jail time. I, being the idiot I was, didn't listen to it and went to bed afterwards. I still to this day think about how much I could have prepared myself if I had listened. I think we are fine. Let's just get back to our show. We awoke the next morning as if nothing had ever happened. I got dressed into my uniform and we left to get Thomas. Thankfully Percy was still asleep. As we pulled out of the work shed, we pulled up to the water tower to top off Thomas' water tanks, and as we did we saw Rennie's gathering some trucks.
Hello, Thomas. So does your water feel strange?
No way!
Telling you what I've gotten has made me feel weak. So I bet it is because I have little fish in my tanks. All right, Thomas.
Just before we could fill up Thomas' tanks, Ted yelled that Thomas was all good and that we should go. I thought this was strange, but before I could argue with him, the signal went green and we went off. I later found out that Ted overheard Thomas chatting with Rennie's, and what he heard was somewhat concerning. Apparently Rennie said the new water they had gotten felt strange and had been a lot weaker than normal. He tried laughing it off by saying he hoped he didn't have any little fishes in his tank, but proceeded to almost go up alone. Ted had grown concerned after hearing these alerts and didn't want to take any risks. I thought he was being paranoid, but the thought he may have been right lingered in the back of my mind. We picked me and Clarabelle from Ellsbridge and travelled up to Tidmouth to begin our first run. At first it went great. We picked up our passengers and travelled up toward Knapford, where we went on to the branch up to Ellsbridge. There we exchanged some passengers with Molly, then travelled down the Farquhar. As we pulled into Farquhar, I jumped from the cab and went to Clarabelle to get ready to use her to take us back up the line. However, I noticed Clarabelle's controls weren't working, so we weren't able to travel backwards. So that took some time to get Thomas and his coaches flipped around for the return journey. As we waited, Thomas grew impatient, saying,
"Oh, where is that damn bus? He's going to make me late. The last thing I want is James bickering with me. I had enough teasing from Ringies today."
Ted and I just looked at each other and sighed. For an engine as old as Thomas, he still was as feisty as a child. After several more minutes of waiting, Tim Tipper rolled up in his mail van. He told us that he passed Bertie, who was sitting on the side of the road facing a car laying in a ditch. He noticed a man he assumed to be his driver, along with several others near the window trying to talk to the man in the car. We continued talking and soon I felt several taps on my shoulder. I turned and saw Ted staring off towards the nearby town. I looked to see a massive crowd of people. It was fucking huge, I tell ya. A nearby workman went to investigate, but just he got close, he screamed in utter terror and began to run. The crowd proceeded to chase after him, and it was then when more screams and nearly several alarms had chilled from the town. Before we knew it, the workman tripped and was surrounded by the horde. We were horrified to his screams with what could only be described as the splattering of his blood. Just as one finished feasting on the man, it looked towards us and let a blood-curdling scream and began coming after us, soon followed by the rest of the people on the platform scrambled into me and Clarabelle. The nearby workman pounded on the doors, begging to be let inside. Tom jumped into the cab and told us to release the brake. I quickly followed and we began to exit the station just as those creatures reached the poor bastards still on the platform. We raced down the branch at speeds we had never gone before. We saw Daisy, who was sitting in a shed. She seemed confused, but as she looked behind us, her face turned to one of fear. We thundered past, and as we entered the tunnel, we heard her screams that show up from behind. We also saw Terrence sitting in a field. We whistled for him to get to safety, but we had already shot past. It was then we heard the frantic honking of a horn, and then we saw Bertie being chased by his own horde of those creatures. There was nothing we could do as he raced towards the horde that had been chasing us. We soon made it to Elsbridge, where we finally had a chance to calm down. Just then a whistle showed from the distance, and then Emily raced by with her coaches. The first two held scared and worried people, while the third shook, and I don't know what was happening with him. I couldn't tell due to the blood which coated the windows from inside. We quickly backed Thomas into the goods shed, and thankfully there was a truck full of coal and a few buckets of water, so we were able to refill his bunker and tanks. At the time, the fear of us coming off the rails was still fresh in my mind. I mean, we got lucky traveling down the branch at those speeds. I guess that's what you call foreshadowing.